Hi, everybody. My name is Glo Robinson. I'll be today's moderator for this event, and we have three incredible speakers that are going to introduce themselves. So if you guys don't mind just telling me your name, your current title, the company you work for, and what you actually do, then we can get started.
All right, I'll go first. My name is Drew Parrott. I'm a product manager at Lumafield, a company that does CT for industrial applications. And I do a lot of marketing, product management, working with sales all over the place.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gwen Betts. I'm the Senior Director of User Experience for the Detection and Response practice at Rapid7. At Rapid7, we make cybersecurity software for security practitioners to help prevent, detect, and respond to terrible attacks that are going on within the cyber world today. I come from myriad background, right? I do a lot of user experience, so I run teams that help actually design and create the workflows and the software, and dabble as well a little bit in marketing and product strategy as well.
And Giannis, tell us what you do.
Yeah, can everybody hear me? Nice.
Yep.
My name is Jonas Dinkena. I'm a senior product manager at Tropic, which is a New York-based startup, and we help other tech-forward companies purchase software, do so more efficiently, and help them save a whole lot of money. I am currently leading the contract management team, so helping companies manage all of their contracts and ensure that they never miss a renewal, but also involved in a lot of kind of the product launch and marketing functions as well. So excited to get in and talk a little bit more about that as well.
Thank you for these amazing introductions. Just to kind of give an overview of today's event, we're really going to be talking about three different stories or angles or perspectives on how to actually launch, whether it's a product or a feature, and hearing from these three experts, their experiences, their stories, and their findings of what they've done in different industries, different sectors, but also what they learned from launching a product, essentially. So we'll take it away with Giannis to go first and tell us his story.
All right, let's hope this screen share goes well.
Always the test.
Indeed. Glo, if you could give me a heads up when we're looking. All right.
All right, sounds good.
Sweet.
Take it away.
All right. So I'm a product manager, as I mentioned, and excited to talk a little bit about launching products as a PM. So you're planning to develop a new product or feature, assuming folks here are product adjacent product managers or interested generally in learning about products. There's really nothing more exciting than those early beginning stages of new product development, maybe except for like actually releasing a feature. But really, how do you ensure that a launch is successful? Well, first, I want to start off with a little disclaimer. The product development process varies from organization to organization, from product manager to product team to product, actual product itself. It's completely different from, different companies to another company. And I'm really just going to be sharing a little bit of experience from my own background with the hopes that you can glean something useful or informational. And, but this is by no means a step-by-step checklist. Just hoping that you can take something away and apply it to situations that you might find yourself in. All right, so what is a successful launch? Well, success can be measured in a number of different ways, and it's really important that as PMs, we establish those success criteria and metrics that are responsible to a launch early in the process. It's going to help us guiding the product launch plan and gives everybody involved something to rally behind, because as PMs, we, in most cases, are not exclusively responsible for this. We have a team behind us, but we do bear the brunt of the responsibility in ensuring that all of those teams have what they need to help push that launch forward successfully. So a couple of things that you might want to look at when considering a successful launch. They're going to vary by company, but one of those things almost invariably is it's based on money. Are your companies going to get revenue from this release? It might be related to user retention. Could be something as far out as social media engagement, number of new users, but ultimately it's the PM's responsibility to really launch that product, or at least guide it to that launch. And defining success is one of those really early lessons that you need to learn. And so one of those lessons that I'd love to talk about a little bit is a failure that I experienced. And it's tied to the idea that as a PM, you must define success for the entire product launch, not just the feature. I think back to a time at my last company, which was a Boston-based startup, and I was the first PM working there. We were building a new complex feature. It impacted a lot of the existing workflows of many users, and we spent a month just laboring over the actual product development process. Everything went through as planned, and we developed a beautiful, really intricate and impactful new feature. But come time for launching, once the feature flags were released and it was out into the world, what became really clear up front was that we had actually, in fewer words than one, we failed to launch. We didn't make plans to update the user-facing documentation, and immediately were met with a flood of users reaching out to us with little documentation for our customer success teams to share with them. The result was a poorly launched feature, even though the product was built perfectly in a lot of senses. And so that just kind of harkens back to the idea that it's far more our responsibility to ensure the entire launch is successful, more so than just the actual feature development process. As product managers, we really do have to ensure that we're kind of playing a role from ideation to launch and even post-launch. So how do you ensure a successful launch? Well, it really depends. Like I mentioned earlier, companies come in all shapes and sizes, as do the responsibilities of every product manager. Like at my previous role at the first PM in an early stage startup, each product release or product launch felt like a marathon. I'd really only worked for early stage companies at this point, and as the first PM, I was generally responsible for the entire product development process from ideation to launch. And that just led me to feeling like I was responsible for an entire race that was all on my own, and it was a difficult part to be in. And for folks here, many of which probably wore similar shoes as the first PM at a company, you've got many hats. First you've got your PM hat. We put that on every day, but in a lot of cases we'll also put on our marketer hat, our sales hat, to make sure that this actually goes to market and is sold appropriately. We've got our ops hat to make sure that documentation is accounted for and the teams have everything they need to really take advantage of this new feature and drive it to our company's goals. And let's be honest, usually PMs, we have to be that de facto bringer of vibes. So that is another one of the probably most important hats that we wear. But let's assume, we're like a Jonas today. We're at a Series B SaaS startup. We have, we're post product market fit. So there's perceived value for the product in the market. We're not starting from scratch, and we have an established roadmap. There's generally some knowledge, both internally and externally, around what's being built at any given time. We have a solid number of users in the base. So we have an audience. We know that each release is going to come with a good deal of eyes, and that's going to impact what type of release cadence we might have. And we have a defined release cadence, meaning there's a general expectation both internally and externally around what's getting released and when. So this gets us into the nuts and bolts of product launches. A successful launch spans weeks, if not months, if not quarters. And it's not all about the product manager. It requires the coordination of numerous steps, various stakeholders and departments, and we can't do it all on our own, as much as some of us might think we'd like to. Generally, PMs at organizations are really only responsible for the beginning part of this process, meaning that the rest of this process is largely out of our hands. Even so, there's still so many ways that we can and should influence the success of the process after it leaves our hands. And that's why today I think of the product launch as more of a relay race. It's really every leg of that race is just as important, and a seamless handoff is what separates good from great. So let's get into it. What are the PMs responsible for? We need to build a product that solves the problem for our users, is delightful to use, drives business outcomes, most importantly, and ensures stakeholders have the resources necessary to do their job, like ensuring a seamless release, capitalize on the opportunity in the market, drive adoption and engagement so that it's actually being used. And doing so really has a massive impact on the organization. When a PM is responsible and helps drive a successful launch, what research has shown is that it can drive earlier sales, a better user experience, and increase the profitability and longevity of the product over time. So that gets into lesson number 2. As a PM, the success of a product launch is not just your responsibility. Not only do product managers have to define the success of a launch, but we also have a direct responsibility to shepherd each launch into success. There may not be many stakeholders involved in the process, but it's ultimately the responsibility of the PM to ensure the success of the launch, and the users, company, and our performance reviews depend on it. So as product managers, what can we do? We got to start planning for the for the launch before we even start the feature. We do this by including launch thinking early in the product planning phase, looking at things like defining your target persona. Who are the people we're building for, and how does this impact the way that other teams involved in the product launch bring this feature to market? Considering sales channels. How do we look at pricing strategy and packaging? How can the product, the actual product thinking impact that? Determining how we introduce it to the market, the different channels that we might go through. And we also want to think about writing the feature announcement, not because we're a better copywriter than marketing, but because it's the best way to ensure that you and marketing are on the same page. And before getting into solutions and requirements, we want to make sure all of this accounted for in our product plan. Then next, we start to continue refining during the scoping and development process. As we all know, as product folks, nothing ever comes to actual launch day in the same shape that it started off. So think about what's changed since you compiled that initial problem statement. How might that impact the eventual launch of this? We want to use that information to refine our launch approach, update the positioning of the launch, think about revisiting how you priced or packaged this feature, start planning for different training materials, outline key success metrics that might drive the goals of the company. And then next, we want to start thinking about communicating and collaborating along the way. Share our research and documentation with the team at each stage to make sure that they all have what they need to prepare their go-to-market plan. That might include sharing your product specs, documentation, and anything that might inform the creation of things like training materials. We want to over-communicate deadlines because we know they're going to change. We want to delegate. If you're lucky enough to have a product marketer or even just the marketing team, share as much information as you can and make sure that they have what they need to take things and hand it off and move away once we're all done. A successful launch makes a successful PM. As a product manager, it's our responsibility to deliver an awesome user experience. And whether or not you know, it's at this decision, it's at the center of every decision you make. Whether it's choosing the right button location, tweaking copy to no end, or making sure that the release announcement thanks that one user who had 30 requests for this thing is acknowledged, we must do it. It's at the center of everything we do, and that's why, and for great reason. So happy shipping. That's all I got for now. Hope you all get to launch some really exciting new things soon.
Thank you so much, Giannis. I have a couple of questions for you. I don't know if you're able to see me or not, but one of the things you touched on is wearing lots of hats at an early stage company as maybe the first or second product manager, product owner. As you get into bigger companies, when you are able to hire that second function to offload some of your work, how do you choose that person and why?
Thinking about like a second product manager?
Yeah, or it could be a project manager, it could be an ops person, it could be in marketing. In your past experiences, maybe when you've had to offload work, how do you delegate?
Yeah, I think it's really important when hiring new product folks, especially at a earlier stage product organization, that you're thinking about predefined tracks within the product that you can delegate work across. So, in the instance that, you're responsible for everything, that might be a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to kind of split up or delegate work across a specific track that somebody can focus on and take ownership over. And I think that's really what at the point you would consider bringing a new product hire on. I think if you have a pretty kind of singular view in a product and the work is, not outside the bounds of what can be accomplished by one PM, I do find that sometimes, an associate PM might actually be a better hire to make, somebody who can kind of help operationalize some of your process to make you more efficient. But really, when I see that products are developing a second stream, whether that's in the form of an entirely new product area or something related, that might be a good signal to hire that next PM.
Thank you. Yeah, and adding on to that, one of the things you touched on is the idea of like being an associate PM. So what's the difference? I know I get this question asked a lot, between like an associate PM, a product manager, project manager. We even see it on some of the bigger tech companies, program manager. Could you just walk us through these differentiations?
Yeah, and I think it's going to vary depending on the organization. And again, I've primarily worked at, this Series B company is the furthest along from a growth process of any company I've worked at. So I've never actually worked with project or program managers, but I can speak to them briefly. Associate product managers generally don't have the same responsibilities as a PM or a senior PM, in the sense of they may not be responsible for, building roadmaps or actually even building, features. I think in the cases I've worked with associate PMs, they're more focused on the operations side of products, and it's a great opportunity for them to get exposure to a lot of the product work that goes on by doing things like helping coordinate feature requests or taking on some of the responsibilities of that pre-launch planning. And I think that once you start shifting into product and senior product manager roles, the responsibilities just tend to increase and the scope of work that you're responsible for becomes a bit wider. And then project and program managers, there's probably folks who have had that role or have worked with them. So maybe I'll defer to them on that question, since in my experience I actually haven't worked with them. I've just seen the job descriptions.
Thank you so much, Giannis. We really appreciated the presentation. Up next, we have Drew.
All right. Bear with me while I try to figure this stuff out. That wasn't so bad. All right. So I'm Drew Parrott, and after this, I'm sure Gwen will be teaching me how to do a proper title slide, because this is the ugliest thing in the world, but it gets better. So who am I? Where did I come from? My name is Drew Parrott. I started off my career working for about 3 months on the very back end of launching products. I managed a team of manufacturing engineers, bringing products, physical products to market, going from like the quantity 10 to the quantity 1,000, leading new product introduction. I started swimming upstream a little further. I did 3 years as a mechanical and optical designer, designing products, designing cameras, and then did 3 years as a product marketing manager at a company that's a 40-year-old company. They have no concept of product management. It's just product marketing is this term that kind of means everything and nothing at the same time. But so I started swimming upstream and going from, manufacturing engineering to mechanical engineering to product marketing, getting closer and closer to the customer. That last photo you can see is me and one of our engineers, on site at a customer site, launching a product. And so, really exciting stuff. And then I left it all and I joined a startup, a stealth startup. You might know of stealth startups. This is what my experience looks like at a stealth startup. I joined a company that claimed they were in stealth, but they had probably a sales team of 5 people, emailing list of 70,000 and active customers. But what we didn't have a brand. We didn't have a website. None of that existed, even though we had paying customers. And when I actually had them on my radar for a bit, and I ended up joining with the goal of, they said, we need a marketing manager. And they reached out to me and I said, yeah, I know my title is product marketing. I'm an engineer. I don't know anything about marketing. Like, I don't think I'd be a good fit. And they said, do you want to still talk to us a bit? And I told them, like, really what I'm after is a product manager. And they said, great, but we need that not now. We need a marketing manager. Will you come here and help us get marketing off the ground? And then you can go figure that stuff out later. And it was a really enticing opportunity. So I said, sure. when I joined, I was given 1 month to make our first website. So I had to go and start talking to sales about how we were selling and talk to customer success about what applications were working and actually figure out how our product worked. And I launched our first website. And our CEO said, "Good job, Drew. That was a 5 out of 10. Let's move on. We'll figure it out later. Like, we need to actually launch the company now. Like, we need to get out of stealth." And that's going to take a while. So we hired someone else who could help with the marketing stuff. And while we were waiting for that person to come on board so we could really ramp this launch process, we said, it'd really be really great to have actual marketing. How do we market even though we don't want to tell people that we exist? So I was given another 4 weeks, and we came up with something called Scan of the Month. And what Scan of the Month is, unfortunately, this has gone totally static, but Scan of the Month was a website that we launched to basically talk about everything we did without telling anybody who we were, or why we were doing it, or any of that stuff. Basically, it allowed us to flex that whole creative content muscle and start putting content out there, even though we weren't going to tie it back to our brand yet. We were testing some strategies. And so this website came together where we got to, customer success and sales said we were doing really well in the plastics industry. And what engineer doesn't love Legos? So we scanned a couple Legos and we made these really cool graphics, and we talked about the plastics injection molding process. And, subtly we're talking about all the features our product had without telling anyone what our product was or where this came from. And it worked, and it was great, and it was super exciting, and the whole company was involved. We got, like I said, sales and customer success involved, but the software engineers at one point were talking about giving me resources so that we could build a lightweight web viewer, and it was like, no, that sounds, software engineering, that's our most valuable resource right now. Don't defer anything for this harebrained experiment that's going to fall on its face. I'll figure it out. But then, putting the result out to the whole company, the software engineers tore it apart, gave me 100 things we could do better. We did 20 of them, but it was a success. And so if you go to Scan of the Month today, it looks way better than this thing I hacked together because we ended up paying somebody to make a nice version of it. And that allowed us to have the confidence that it was time to turn towards launching. Now, during the whole process to build out how we're going to launch the company, we talked to a lot of our advisors, venture capital people that were on our board, other people at other companies that had done things successfully. And one piece of advice that we got that really stuck that I found really valuable was this guy, Jason Ponton from DCVC, said to our CEO and I, he said, "Don't treat launch as a moment. It's a campaign. It's a process." And so we internalized that to say, the day that we launch this company, that's just us announcing that we are running for president. We're a candidate. We're out there. We want some commotion, but that's just the beginning. And then so we set a 6-month goal horizon from there and said, this flagship trade show that we're going to spend a bunch of money at, that's election day. And so whatever we do between now and then is our whole launch process. It's 6 months, and that way there's no specific event that you can point to and say launch failed, because we're always going to be evolving. So let's treat it that way. I love the person who runs our office. She turned that into launch as a process. So we had a full week celebration around launch. That was pretty brilliant on her end, and the CEO couldn't say no. So we got to do lots of fun stuff all week. So, building up to launch, that meant building out a lot of things. And we, had nothing at that moment. But one of the things that we can tie to talk about how collaborative launching a company is or launching a product is this one photo right here. Pretty much everybody at our company went into making this. When we decided to launch, we said, okay, there's certain things that need to be true. We're going to need a website. We're going to need photography of our product. We sell hardware and software. It's real. We need a photo. We can't have a rendering like that. We lose all credibility. So we need a real photo of our hardware. Hardware engineers, we need our hardware to be done at this time. And that, was pushing the goal. So we have to start doing trade-offs about when things will get done and who's going to do what. Software, we need the same thing. We need to be done at this certain time. We decided that we were going to launch with a PLG or product-led growth motion. So that completely diverted what we were building software-wise, because we were going to open it up for free and let people go explore projects on our website for free. And so that's the software that you see in this photo here. You're seeing the hardware in this photo. That's actually a sales engineer and the woman who runs manufacturing for us in the photo. They happen to be walking by, and the photographer liked their look, I guess. But facilities had to get involved. We had to take our lab and tear it apart to stage this because our machines are like 2,500 pounds and we didn't want to be trucking it around town. So everybody at the company got involved for this one moment. And we got through it and we launched the company, and that was fantastic. But one of the important things we did was we tied ourselves to a handcuff. We basically said we want to launch in April, but we signed up for a trade show in May. So we could slide from April to like, late April, but we couldn't slide too far because we had already committed ourselves to being physically on site. And having a handcuff like that really helps everyone organize their thoughts and forces you to get something done. And as long as you're getting something done, you're making progress. And so right after launch, we got to this trade show and we pulled together this, it was a really fantastic event. Like we punched above our weight, I would like to say, even though we registered like way too late to get a good space. Our booth was really small. It was pretty much packed the entire time. It looked great. We had interactive demos. A lot of people internally were saying like, oh, this is going to be a lot of work. Can't we just show videos? And it was like, absolutely not. We're going to make this interactive and people are going to get stuck in that booth. And so the software team rallied, and again, they pulled off a bunch of special stuff. The hardware team spun out a new version of the hardware that was even prettier. It wasn't just photography pretty, but like people are going to be poking their heads around it. Let's make it like really the final product. And so that's great, right? Like we launched the company, we launched the product, it's all out there. Well, what did I talk about, right? It's a whole process. So what are we going to do for the next 6 months, 3 months, whatever it was that we had left? This was the iteration on our product. So we were out there with customers and getting feedback. And we decided that what we came to our next trade show with could not just be the same thing we had just showed up with. We doubled the booth size and we said, what are we going to fill it with? Well, there's a bunch of different vectors we could push. We were getting feedback from customers that they want more resolution. They want to do larger things. They want to go faster. But the faster one was something we latched onto, and we had a pathway to do things not just an order of magnitude faster, but 2 orders of magnitude faster. So that was going to be like the valuable thing that we stuck with. And we said, let's figure out a way we can exhibit this. And working with the engineers, this is something that they came up with that I thought was like incredible product style thinking, where they came up with this matrix. They said, what you're asking us to do is pretty much near impossible. So we're going to take all the things that everyone's asking for, the product managers, the executives, and we're going to put this matrix out of here's what's minimum viable is, here's what amazing would be, and that's all the stuff the executives are saying, and then break it out into all the different features. And weekly, we would track progress like this. We'd have a traffic control meeting to say, how are we approaching these actual milestones we have? Where do we stand on this matrix? Made it super visual, so everyone from the executives down to the engineers, they all could just look at it and instantly know things were good, things were bad. We needed to move things faster, slower. Executives didn't get their Travolta Saturday Night Fever robot, but we still pulled off everything we needed. And we moved hyper speed fast with this. So we took what was a manually fed CT scanner that does X-ray scans of these objects. And in June, right after we had gotten back from that trade show, we basically had this idea of, hey, we think we can go faster now. How do we show that off? Let's stick a robot in front of it and like remove humans from the equation. So that photo is, we got like a robot as fast as we could, and we had it picking up boxes and sticking them in a big cardboard box because our scanner, you physically have to open it. So then we had to work with the hardware team to re-architect it so that we could automate the door. We worked with the software team to speed up acquisition. And within 1 month, we got to the place that we were demoing live to our board of directors, something they didn't even know that was on our radar. It wasn't on our roadmap or anything like that. We pulled it out of a hat. And then we went from there 1 month later, polishing it up to the level of it's no longer boxes with 3D printed parts that might have some defects in them and this like rough dashboard. We brought this to Chicago last week and we showed everybody these are real automotive parts. We're running this live in front of 100,000 people in Chicago at IMTS. Raul right here, he came and saw it last week. I met him for the first time out at the show. And that was the end of the process for us. Like launch process is done, but it's not really, right? Like now we are buckling down and figuring out how do we work through everything that we did at that show. We're getting a lot more feedback. What are the next refinements we're going to do? And we're just going to keep progressing forward. So that's my story. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Drew. We have a time for a couple of questions. One of the things that I really liked about your talk was about kind of explaining the bonding of your team, and about how this, like, cross-functional team or experience really helped you launch and be super successful. I think that's the dream for any group project in college that they try to get you to do. Oh my God, you got the business team, the engineering team, but I think you guys are a living, breathing example of that. How did this bond your team by having to race for this deadline? And did you notice an impact in the dynamics after you launched?
Yeah. It's one of the things that I still grapple with is that setting a hard goal isn't always like detrimental to people. Like if you set that goal, but then support everybody to get there and like really dig in with them, yeah, it creates this like bond amongst the whole team. So for example, that robotic thing, it was like a very small, we carved out like this is the software engineer, this is the mechanical engineer, and this is the person who can interface between the two. And me as the product manager, all four of us, let's sprint at that. And we were just meeting a couple times a week, and like it seemed insanely hard, but every week we were posting out videos to the executives and the rest of the company, and everybody was like, holy crap, how are 4 people getting this much done? It just provides hyper focus sometimes. So yeah, don't be afraid to set like a really extreme goal, because sometimes that just focuses out the dancing robot and you get real stuff done.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, I think that's the reason why one of the reasons why startups are so appealing is because it's that idea of, wow, we're really bonded together to solve this behemoth of a problem. My second question, adding on to that, is how have you dealt with facilitating information management? So, you and the engineering team are working on something. How do you get it to the marketing team? It's always a game of telephone. Do you have any recommendations and experiences you'd like to share?
Not really. I think this is something like a million companies have been started up just to try to solve, is the human communication problem.
Yeah.
And I have yet to find any tool that fixes humans. I had a boss at one point who said any system that is only 50% right, but used 100% of the time is going to be so much more useful than something that's 80% right and used 50% of the time. Like, so, what we tended to do, the thing I found that was the most useful was these traffic control type of meetings. So when we're preparing for trade shows, having a weekly cadence or bi-weekly, where you're looping people in as direct responsible individuals for various segments. And so, a prep for a trade show, for example, it would be a meeting I would lead every week, but there'd be 5 or 6 people who own various areas of it coming to it with updates, surfacing questions. And, on really tight schedules, you're able to get a lot done that way.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, we have Gwen.
It's my turn to get the technology up and running. Okay, so I think Jonas and Drew had some really great stories. Today, I'm going to talk to you and tell a story about when a product launch does go wrong. I think Jonas also did a great job talking through like all the activities and the product development lifecycle. Drew, you did a fantastic job like actually showing that work getting done. I'm going to tell you an experience I had in a startup, or rather post-acquisition. So I also come from a startup background. I have been a founding team member. I have been like boots on the ground consultant. I've also joined and been part of startups that were that growth stage. And now where I've been at with Rapid7, I actually came into that company through an acquisition. So this story is from when the company that I was part of, called Command, was acquired by Rapid7, and then we were tasked with rebuilding our on-prem software to launch in a SaaS cloud environment, and then at the same time, build 2 integrations into the flagship products of the portfolio, and all within 9 months. So as you can imagine, there's a lot that can go wrong. There's a lot that probably did go wrong, but I want to tell the story anyway. So let's see. As you can imagine, like, the fellow speakers have talked a lot about like the perfect process, right? Like we did all the standard things, right? We had Scrum teams and complete mission teams built out around core areas of both the new product and then the 2 integration points. We had our core customer base is defined, business and customer targets were ready to go. There was lots of discovery with iterative design evaluation along the way. We were planning and we did deliver in a just-in-time cohort release. As you can imagine, like these kinds of projects in the startup world, like you're just launch constantly, right? Like, yes, you make time for QA. Yes, you make time to pound on the keyboard, but at the end of the day, you need to get the thing out. We did all those things, right? We defined our milestones to success. I think that was really apt from an earlier presentation about like defining success early and often and making sure that you have the instrumentation built to measure. You have an adoption study ready to go. You know what, or you have a belief of what good looks like, and all the go-to-market motions. There's internal enablement, right? Like, does everyone internally, your sales, your marketing, your customer success side of the business, are they ready to go? Do they know what is being released? Do we have the same story on value? Public relations, corporate comms, all of the activities that you would do, right? Like we did the whole 9 yards. It was a brand new product with 2 big integrations, right? We even did a public live stream 2 weeks before it launched to announce that this thing was going live. We hosted user groups. We went across the country and hosted user groups with the customer bases. Like we did it all, right? So you would think by all those things that we did, like we had the perfect process, all the activity, you would think that this was a successful launch, right? Felt like it, right? And by the way, the product and marketing team felt like it too, right? Like we were off celebrating, like, yes, we did it just in time. Not only did we release this brand new thing, but we have 2 integrations and we're starting to see some adoption. But meanwhile, a month in and through our cohort releases, what we didn't realize is that our support and CSM staff were struggling. So you might think like they were getting an inundation of requests, things like that. Those were actually pretty moderate. That's why we did the cohort release to start to release to different subsets of customers to see what the initial interaction and reactions would be so that we could control the flow of things like support tickets, things like requests, right? But what we didn't realize we hadn't done well was the enablement piece. Yeah, we like did the whole roadshow of like, here's the value, here's what you need to know, here are some playbooks for you to get going. But the mistake we made is this is a technical product. We just thought that we could give them that documentation, they'd consume it, and they would actually know how to troubleshoot and support our customers through it. Not the actual case. So while we're off celebrating, our partners over in support and customer success were drowning. Meanwhile, sales and our customers loving the integrations, right? Like loving the release, we're screaming more. Sales themselves, definitely like always going to sell, always be selling. This was Q3 moving into Q4. So you can imagine in B2B software, Q4 is all about getting all the deals over the line. And almost often in my experience in B2B, Q4 is your biggest quarter for sales, right? But in an interesting way, while customers were also demanding more, by the way, in product world, like we know this is the iterative development cycle, right? Like that's a good sign. That means there's demand. This is great. So product and marketing are celebrating even more. Customers want more. Okay, let's get to work while we're still doing this cohort release. Sales actually had another problem, which you might start to see and encounter in a subscription world. So we were getting to the end of the quarter and we were doing cohort releases. We had 4 to 5 planned, but halfway through the third one, we had a problem with releasing to a very specific region. There's infrastructure problems and we had to actually pause all the additional releases. We couldn't actually start doing more of those cohort releases, starting them back up until mid to late November. Now, one of the challenges that you're going to run into in a subscription-based world where you've already sold things to customers, but they don't have it yet, is a concept called revenue recognition. So if we did not release everything by the end of the year, we were at risk of breaching contract. And there's a whole lot of legal ways that that can go wrong. And so we, not realizing that this was a possibility or believing like, hey, cohort releases are fine. We didn't realize, especially as a junior, product team coming into a bigger company, that was a concern. So, we're still off celebrating and then we're still running into these issues where parts of the businesses aren't actually supported, right? And then as you can imagine, then our executives were like, what happened here, right? Like on one hand, they're excited. We're releasing new things. We're getting accolades from, market analysts, from customers, from, the outward world. But on the inside, it just feels like we're struggling. And despite our success in our just-in-time release, operations internally are not going as smooth as we had wanted, right? So I think the big question is like, well, what happened? What happened next, right? So this is where, for me, the lessons come in. First and foremost, perceptions will become realities. Whether or not you feel on the, you as a product team, you were successful, and on the outside of it, your customers, are raving and you're getting accolades and it's great. On the inside, if your partners are not supportive and they're still having challenges while they see you celebrating, you're going to set up a really bad dynamic between you and them, and you're not actually like honoring how to support them in the future, right? And so I think the lesson here that we learned very quickly is, while we were doing all the activities, we were communicating internally, leading up to the product launch. We didn't know what we didn't know, quite honestly. And it taught us to get ahead of these misaligned or malaligned expectations really, really fast, especially when it comes to like perceptions of your executive staff, and especially your partners over in sales and customer success. And especially being, a smaller startup that got acquired by a company at the time of around 500 people, they had a much more mature sales organization, customer success organization. Our experience was just a starting point, right? Even though many of us had been in larger companies before, what we hadn't been was like essentially an innovation incubator in a larger company with very, very high expectations of us, right? And so we brought with us the expectations of our smaller company, where we knew how to, transfer knowledge and information very easily between us. Like the customer success people sat next to me, right? Like I was BFFs with our sales engineers, right? We had naturally just had those relationships. And by that sheer factor of collaborating together, like they were already part of the solutioning with us. So they knew what we were building and how customers, should troubleshoot with it, set it up, all that fun stuff, right? So, if you are in a space where you end up getting acquired and you don't know what you don't know, I would encourage you to really think about with, you and your partners, and then the other sides of the business, how your playbooks need to evolve, right? The playbooks that we were a fairly structured company, smaller startup before, but it was clear our playbooks just did not meet the demand and did not have the knowledge we needed for this larger company that, in some ways, some of the teams are a bit more siloed, and we just had to learn to navigate that. Sometimes, lessons learned and failures are the only way that you can do that. But my advice here is be cognizant of that and learn from lessons from other folks, and understand that you're going to need to evolve those playbooks, either if you get acquired or as your companies grow as well, right? What got you here won't get you there. And then a big piece of feedback and advice, as we were going through this, right, was how do we defend this to executives? But we actually came at it from the wrong angle of it wasn't actually about defense, because in our minds, like we did as best as we could. There were some things we couldn't anticipate, and we were trying to get ahead of some of those things. But this advice to me is like the best advice you can give, regardless of it, if it's in relation to a startup launch or not. Like when things are not going as planned, you really need to plan to move forward, not to defend your decisions. You may sometimes be put in positions by, your leaders, executive staff, your boss, whoever it may be, to try to understand like what went wrong and why. And that's usually from the lens they're coming from. They're not coming from the lens almost always to punish. They're coming from the lens of how do we learn from this and how do we move forward, right? And so really, I'm a big believer that, I've seen teams like err on the other side of like, well, we can't launch until we know all of these things, right? They go the other end of the spectrum. But there are some things that you can't always anticipate all of the outcomes. You can control your response. And as long as you are proactive and communicative and, trying to lead and anticipate, I think you'll be successful here. But the big lesson too is like, just learn from past failures, take it with you in the future, and just be optimistic about, all the lessons that you have under your belt that will make you a better, stronger product person in the future. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Gwen. Wow, a lot to digest there. Gosh, it seems to me that a lot of the stuff about product management and deadlines and execution is about dealing with people.
Yes.
They suck, right?
Nah.
So my question to you is, any thoughts on dealing with egos in this process?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer, right? Like egos are always going to happen, and especially small, large companies, you're going to run into politics. And politics is normal and natural, quite honestly. And the advice, like I sometimes hear this in especially more, associate level folks, especially UXers, like it feels disheartening because you want to believe that you and your ideas and your work just stands for itself and egos don't matter. But the big thing is like you got to learn to navigate through it, right? And so like in egos, I always try to find like what's the motivating thing for this person, because almost always with egos, like they just want to look good. Sometimes they want to take the credit for the work that you're doing, but they also just want to look good. And oftentimes, like as long as you have the right people seeing your work, I wouldn't necessarily worry about the credit necessarily, but how do you align what you need and your agenda with what they want and their agenda? Sometimes you're going to have to swallow your pride and ego too. Just to get the job done. But the worst thing you can do is double down on tribalism yourself and just try to combat egos, because that's not successful either internally. And at the end of it, your customers end up losing too. So big advice, like try to find what motivates them, try to align like what you need with what they need and deliver for both of you.
That's a really good piece of advice. My second question is, when you guys got acquired, I mean, how did you guys kind of navigate the environment of working in a bigger company, and about how, because you touched on this with the playbooks, what worked for us as a smaller startup and now being integrated, what would you say was the biggest friction point with that acquisition?
So almost always when you're getting acquired and you're going into a bigger company, you're going to have different divisions, different business units. And one of the things that was a little challenging for us was not the getting to know people. In fact, that was actually very easy. This was back before the pandemic too, where you could easily travel. And Rapid7 was definitely like a go meet your people. We had products offices all over the major cities in the US and parts of Europe. And we would go and meet with people and essentially not only do planning, but like just get to know the people that we knew we had to work with. That actually wasn't that hard. I would advise, like, if you're entering any company, you need to find the intrinsic network that already exists, like where are the power structures and who do you need to know to get work done. The friction point came with priorities. So when we were building net new product with 2 integration points, we had assumed that everyone had the same mandate of support this team and whatever they need to get this done. And that wasn't necessarily true, or at least perception was from other folks. We have this other stuff, we have other priorities, we don't have time for that. And so the friction point to me in most companies, and when you're working across teams, is that lack of shared alignment and shared priorities. One of my biggest lessons, we had some challenges. There was, honestly, when you're distributed, sometimes people can just kind of ignore and, push it off. If you can physically go and work with those people and be there in person and make them part of the solution and just ask for even just a little bit of their time and try to do the legwork for them, but make sure that they are bought in, I think you can reduce some of those friction points, an incredible amount.
Thank you so much. We have about 10 minutes left, and so we'd like to open the floor for any Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for the panelists? Yes.
Allow me to run the microphone over to you.
Yeah, Drew, you mentioned that early in the stages you were considered like a stealth startup, and despite having like a number of customers or a sales team and a email marketing campaign that went out to a number of customers, I was just curious the thought process of like staying stealth versus actually having a name, and what are like the advantages or disadvantages to that?
Yeah, sure thing. It's a big part of the reason I joined the company is they were doing something that I viewed as pretty different than conventional there. The idea was we did not want to be developing or investing a crazy amount of resources developing something without customer contact, especially when we're developing a hardware product, right? Like it takes a long time to release hardware, let alone hardware that's going to shoot X-rays out, right? There's like regulatory things there. So the thinking was that we could engage with customers early on, and we were working in a mode where our whole business model is hardware as a service. So early on, we could say, well, the hardware is not ready to release, but you can mail us parts, we'll scan them, and you can use the software component. So we were able to engage with customers in a way that we could get revenue, and the revenue was basically meaningless. The big thing was we had real people solving real problems with our stuff providing us feedback. So that was the big reason they did things like that. I know a lot of companies that go the other direction, and like I said, launching as a campaign, right? Like no matter what, when you come out with something, it's wrong, and we just closed the gap of how wrong we were when we came out.
Thank you.
And yes, in the back.
Thank you all. What suggestions do you have, if any, on preventing team burnout when you have internal or soft deadlines as opposed to hard deadlines? I know Drew suggested that when he was speaking, his team was up against a hard deadline, and so it was kind of at all costs. But what if those deadlines are soft ones?
Well, the question I would ask in return is how, you as a team are also holding yourselves accountable to delivering, right? Soft deadlines, I actually find burnout to be much more of a problem in hard deadline situation, right? Because it's almost always a business mandated date. And whether or not it is the reality of what you can deliver, you have to make some of it happen. Whereas soft deadlines, it would tell me that there's probably not as much operational structure or support. And so if people are burning out, even with soft deadlines, the advice that I would give is come together as a team. Don't try to impose as like one unit or one person, but figure out like what's missing from your operations that's going to help give you a little bit more structure to support getting something done and released, because that also builds morale, right? Like, what is killing morale, what will always kill morale, is lack of celebration, lack of wins, and almost always wins should be defined by customer wins. And so if you're not releasing and you are not holding yourselves accountable even to soft deadlines, it can be really, really troublesome in terms of morale and feeling like you are actually producing value.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
This is for Jonas. You were talking about as a product manager wearing a bunch of hats. Do you have any suggestions in terms of what the next two hats you should delegate? I mean, I know you talked about an associate and then ops, but if you could expand on that a little bit. Because I know all those different hats that have different levels of value, especially when you're an early startup.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think it comes down to the resources that your company has. In a lot of the earlier stage companies, that they're minimal, but there may be somebody on the team that has a penchant for writing, or somebody that is a particularly good on the phone and would be better served on sales calls or demos than you. So I think like having an understanding of the team around you, like first and foremost, is the best way to determine like where you can delegate. But I don't know if there is a cut and dry decision for when to hire somebody that can help you delegate some of that work. I think it's going to depend on the type of company, the type of organization that you work for, the type of product that you're building, and in your own skill set as well. I think understanding where you bring the most value, especially at an early stage company, is really important. So if you feel that your ability to sell the product as well as build it is important to the company's bottom line and success, then I think you should put yourself in that position until you can do that no longer, but delegate the rest as often as possible.
Any other questions? Okay, then I guess that concludes this panel. Thank you so much, Gwen, Drew, and Jonas. It was a pleasure to speak with all of you and hear all the incredible insights that you have. So thank you so much, everybody.